June 6, 1944. As the early morning light began to streak across the Norman sky, a Waco CG-4A glider severed its connection to the tow plane at an altitude of 800 feet. Within its fuselage, securely fastened to the floor, lay a Willis MB Jeep, a formidable assembly of 2,450 pounds of robust steel, resilient rubber, and a powerful engine. The glider pilot exerted strenuous effort on the control yoke, guiding the craft as hedgerows rapidly ascended to meet them. The impact was inevitable and severe. The glider's fuselage folded inward like an accordion, its fabric rent asunder, and its wooden spars exploded into a shower of sharp splinters. Once the swirling dust settled, an astonishing event transpired. The Jeep's engine, against all odds, sputtered to life. The vehicle then, with remarkable integrity, rolled out of the mangled wreckage, its suspension systems perfectly intact, its steering mechanism entirely responsive, poised and ready to transport troops deeper inland, while German forces were still in a state of disarray, struggling to formulate a coherent response. This extraordinary outcome was not merely a stroke of fortune. It was the direct result of an engineering marvel that the United States Army Air Forces had, just 18 months prior, contemptuously dismissed as an egregious waste of vital war materials. Across the vast expanse of the English Channel on that pivotal morning, a staggering total of over 1,400 Jeeps underwent similarly violent and abrupt entries into the contested territory of occupied France. Gliders, in their perilous descents, plunged headfirst into formidable stone walls, executed jarring belly flops into treacherous, flooded fields, and cartwheeled uncontrollably across verdant pastures. These aircraft were designed to be expendable, conceived for one-way missions with no expectation of return. However, the Jeeps themselves were absolutely indispensable. They were engineered to endure and survive these catastrophic crashes, to drive away from the very wreckage that had claimed the lives of the gliders transporting them. Conventional military wisdom unequivocally declared such a feat to be an impossibility. The prevailing logic dictated that one simply could not package a vehicle in a manner robust enough to withstand the immense destructive forces capable of tearing an aircraft apart. The intricate mathematical calculations did not align with this proposition. Furthermore, the necessary specialized materials were deemed unavailable or prohibitively expensive. And yet, defying all established norms and expert predictions, there they were, these resilient vehicles, navigating the narrow streets of Norman villages, with the smoldering remains of their delivery conveyances burning fiercely in their wake. The visionary individual who rendered this seemingly impossible achievement a reality was not a high-ranking general. Nor was he a seasoned military engineer possessing decades of specialized ordnance experience. He was, in fact, a civilian whom the Army had unceremoniously dismissed in 1942, a consultant whom they had derided as a crackpot, utterly incapable of comprehending real-world operational constraints. His name was Palmer Coslet Putnam, and his relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of a problem that no one else seemed willing or able to solve ultimately led to a profound and lasting transformation in the very nature of airborne warfare. Nevertheless, what truly distinguishes this narrative from the myriad of conventional stories detailing military innovation is a crucial element. Putnam's design was so profoundly radical, so fundamentally contrary to the entrenched military doctrine of the era, that even after its irrefutable success in rigorous testing, the Quartermaster Corps made concerted efforts to suppress and ultimately bury it. Their opposition stemmed from what they considered legitimate concerns regarding the exorbitant material costs during a period of stringent wartime rationing, the potential for severe production bottlenecks, and the complexities of field maintenance. Beyond these practical considerations, there was also an undeniable undercurrent of institutional pride. The bitter pill of admitting that an outsider had brilliantly solved a challenge that their own highly credentialed engineers had found insurmountable was a difficult one to swallow. This, then, is the compelling account of how sheer desperation ultimately triumphed over entrenched ego. It elucidates how one man's ostensibly wasteful and unconventional design became the decisive factor, distinguishing between crucial Allied mobility and debilitating Allied stagnation during the critical hours immediately following D-Day. It delves into the often overlooked realm of hidden logistics, the unglamorous yet indispensable engineering feats that rarely make it into dramatic combat footage, but which fundamentally determine whether armies will advance decisively or become hopelessly bogged down. And the genesis of this remarkable story lies in comprehending precisely why, in the year 1942, virtually every esteemed expert within the U.S. military establishment firmly believed that the concept of airdropping functional jeeps was nothing more than a delusional fantasy. Palmer Coslet Putnam, by all outward appearances, did not embody the typical image of a man destined to revolutionize military logistics. Born in 1900 into a prominent publishing family in the bustling metropolis of New York, he had dedicated the entirety of the 1930s to the ambitious pursuit of wind energy projects in the serene landscapes of Vermont. During this period, he meticulously designed experimental turbines that established utility companies, with polite but firm indifference, largely disregarded. He possessed a distinguished engineering degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, an exceptionally restless and inquisitive mind, and a well-earned reputation for approaching complex problems from refreshingly unconventional and often unorthodox perspectives. Upon the outbreak of war in Europe, Putnam recognized a profound opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the burgeoning conflict. Consequently, he approached the War Department in the early months of 1941, presenting them with a series of innovative proposals for advanced airborne supply systems. The Army, at that time overwhelmed by a deluge of defense contractors and self-proclaimed visionaries, promptly categorized and filed his meticulously crafted letters under the generic heading of unsolicited civilian correspondence, effectively consigning them to bureaucratic obscurity. Then came the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, an event that dramatically reshaped the military's previously dismissive attitude toward external ideas. Suddenly, the Army Air Forces found itself committed to an unprecedented and massive expansion of its airborne divisions, specialized paratroopers whose strategic mission was to seize critical bridges and crossroads far ahead of advancing ground forces. However, a glaring and critical flaw permeated the core of this doctrine. Paratroopers were, by their very nature, light infantry. They jumped into combat armed with only rifles, machine guns, and perhaps a few lightweight mortars. They possessed no vehicles, no artillery, and consequently, no capacity for sustained, heavy firepower. Once they successfully landed, they were essentially isolated and stranded until conventional ground units could link up with them. The German Wehrmacht had painfully assimilated this crucial lesson during their arduous invasion of Crete in May 1941, where their paratroopers endured devastatingly high casualties before desperately needed reinforcements could arrive. American military planners were resolutely determined not to replicate such a catastrophic mistake. The apparent solution seemed straightforward and obvious: gliders. These engineless aircraft possessed the unique capability to be towed behind larger transport planes, released over designated landing zones, and subsequently deliver heavier, more substantial equipment. The British military was already actively experimenting with their Horsa glider, an aircraft capable of carrying either a jeep or a light artillery piece. In response, The Americans developed their own version, the Waco CG-4A, which boasted an impressive cargo capacity of 3,750 pounds. Problem seemingly solved, right? Not even remotely close. Engineers swiftly discovered that the combination of gliders and jeeps constituted a catastrophically perilous pairing. A single jeep, fully fueled and equipped, weighed a substantial 2,450 pounds. During the inherently violent process of a glider landing, which was, in essence, a meticulously controlled crash, the vehicle transformed into an incredibly destructive battering ram. If secured using conventional methods, the immense impact forces either violently ripped the jeep from its moorings, sending it hurtling uncontrollably through the glider's fuselage, or the extreme deceleration shock severely bent its frame, shattered its axles, and reduced its engine block to nothing more than twisted scrap metal. In the middle of 1942, the Quartermaster Corps assigned their most skilled engineers to tackle this formidable problem. They meticulously attempted reinforced tie-downs, yet the Jeep invariably sustained catastrophic damage. They experimented with padding the landing gear contact points, but the frame stubbornly continued to twist beyond repair. They even tried reducing fuel loads in an effort to decrease overall weight, but the Jeep consistently arrived at its destination as unusable junk. After a frustrating 6 months of relentless failures, the official recommendation was to completely abandon the concept of Jeep delivery by glider, and instead concentrate on transporting smaller, lighter cargo that could more effectively withstand the rigors of rough landings. However, airborne commanders vehemently rejected this recommendation. They argued passionately that without mobile firepower and rapid transportation, their troops would be mercilessly massacred. A tense stalemate ensued. This was the intractable situation when Palmer Putnam arrived at Wright Field, Ohio, in December 1942. He had learned through unofficial channels that the military was grappling with a severe vehicle delivery problem, and firmly believed that he possessed a viable solution. The engineering officers who met with him were, from the very first minute, deeply skeptical. Putnam was not merely proposing improved tie-downs or stronger glider frames. His radical idea was to construct a massive wooden crate around each individual Jeep, a specialized container meticulously designed to absorb the brutal impact forces through a process of controlled destruction. The quartermaster officers, with their acute understanding of logistics and resources, immediately performed the necessary calculations. Putnam's proposed design would necessitate an astonishing 200 board feet of plywood for each Jeep, in addition to substantial quantities of steel cable and specialized assembly procedures. Multiplying this by the thousands of Jeeps required for the war effort, they quickly realized they were discussing materials that could otherwise be allocated to constructing vital barracks, essential landing craft, or critical aircraft components. In the agonizing midst of the most severe material shortages in American history, Putnam was proposing a crate whose production cost was nearly equivalent to that of the valuable vehicle it contained. They politely thanked him for his time and summarily sent him back home. Officially, Palmer Putnam's audacious proposal was formally rejected on January 8, 1943. The Army optimistically declared that it would simply find another way. Except, in grim reality, there was no other viable way, and everyone involved knew it. To truly comprehend why Putnam's idea initially seemed utterly insane, one must grasp the unforgiving physics governing glider crashes. A fully loaded Waco CG-4A glider approached its designated landing zone at an approximate speed of 70 miles per hour, descending at an exceptionally steep angle due to the absence of an engine to arrest its rapid descent. Pilots instinctively aimed for expansive, open fields, but in the chaotic and unpredictable conditions of actual combat, characterized by treacherous hedgerows heavily cratered terrain, and relentless enemy fire, they were often forced to utilize whatever patch of ground presented itself, no matter how unsuitable. The precise moment the glider's skids made contact with the earth, the deceleration was anything but gradual. It was astonishingly violent and instantaneous. In a mere single second, the vehicle plummeted from highway speed to a complete standstill. The immense forces involved were not measured in gentle G-forces, akin to a car applying its brakes. These were unequivocally collision forces, the kind of destructive energy that effortlessly crumpled robust steel. For the Jeep confined within, this created multiple, catastrophic failure points. Firstly, there was the inexorable force of inertia. Newton's first law of motion, an immutable principle, held no regard for military necessity. That 2,450-pound vehicle possessed an inherent, powerful desire to continue moving forward at 70 miles per hour, even after the glider itself had abruptly ceased all forward motion. Standard cargo straps, even those of military-grade quality specifically rated for aircraft use, either snapped irrevocably under the immense load or violently ripped their anchor points clean out of the glider's wooden floor. Engineers meticulously calculated that to successfully keep a Jeep stationary during such a brutal impact, the restraints would need to be capable of withstanding an instantaneous force exceeding 15,000 pounds. Constructing tie-downs of such formidable strength would necessitate reinforcing the entire glider cargo bay, which, in turn, added significant weight, consequently reducing the crucial payload capacity, thereby utterly defeating the primary purpose of the glider. The second profound problem was that even if one could miraculously prevent the Jeep from moving, the sheer force of deceleration still inflicted mortal damage upon the vehicle itself. One could vividly imagine bolting a Jeep securely to an unyielding concrete wall and then, with devastating force, ramming that very wall into the Jeep at 70 miles per hour. That scenario, in functional terms, precisely replicated what transpired during a severe glider landing. The Jeep's frame flexed far beyond its design tolerance limits. Suspension components, engineered primarily to absorb minor bumps and moderate jumps, not instantaneous stops, sheared violently from their mounting points. The engine, typically resting on rubber mounts to mitigate vibration during normal operation, transformed into a 400-pound wrecking ball that tore loose from its moorings and proceeded to demolish everything in its immediate vicinity. Transmissions cracked, axles bent irremediably, and wheels broke clean off their hubs. The third critical issue stemmed from the inherently unpredictable nature of the landing itself. A perfect glider approach onto impeccably flat ground might, under ideal circumstances, generate survivable forces. However, combat landings were anything but perfect. Gliders frequently struck concealed ditches and violently nosed over, slamming their precious cargo forward into the cockpit bulkhead. They often encountered capricious crosswinds and rolled erratically sideways, tumbling the cargo like garments in a clothes dryer. Furthermore, they frequently collided with unforeseen obstacles, towering trees, sturdy fence posts, or discarded farm equipment, and consequently disintegrated in an asymmetrical and utterly destructive fashion. During extensive training maneuvers conducted in North Carolina throughout the year 1942, the elite 82nd Airborne Division encountered a significant operational hurdle: the abysmal survival rate of Jeeps transported via glider. A grim statistic emerged, revealing that fewer than 30% of these vital utility vehicles arrived in a functional state. Conversely, a staggering 70% of the Jeeps deployed through aerial gliders sustained damage so severe they were rendered inoperable. Many were utterly destroyed, becoming complete write-offs, while others necessitated extensive hours of complex field repairs, a luxury combat situation simply would not afford. The prevailing engineering wisdom, after considerable analysis, solidified into a stark conclusion: devising a restraint mechanism capable of safeguarding vehicles across the myriad permutations of potential crash scenarios was an insurmountable task. The sheer multitude of environmental variables and the overwhelming, unpredictable forces involved made such a design an impossibility. The pressing requirement for the military, therefore, was to discover an innovative method that could render the Jeep impervious to the destructive energies of impact, to effectively isolate the vehicle from the violent disarray surrounding it during a crash. Yet, the practical implementation of such an idea presented a formidable conundrum. Traditional protective measures were clearly unfeasible. One could not simply encase a Jeep in protective layers akin to bubble wrap, nor could it be enveloped in sufficient cushioning to be truly effective without rendering the entire package too voluminous to fit within the confines of a glider. Furthermore, a fundamental redesign of the Jeep itself was entirely out of the question. The Willis Company was already operating at its absolute peak, churning out these indispensable vehicles at maximum capacity, and any alterations to their established design would inevitably bring production to a grinding halt for an unacceptable period of many months. In the face of these challenges, several ingenious engineers put forth alternative proposals. One suggestion involved the creation of highly specialized airborne Jeeps, equipped with substantially reinforced frames and exceptionally ruggedized components. However, this concept quickly failed to gain traction. The associated costs were projected to be astronomical, soaring far beyond acceptable budgetary limits. Moreover, the production timeline for such bespoke vehicles would have been unacceptably protracted, and even these strengthened Jeeps were still predicted to incur catastrophic damage during the most severe impact scenarios. Another group of innovators advocated for parachute delivery, envisioning Jeeps being dropped from low altitudes using colossal cargo chutes. Initial test drops of this method displayed a certain degree of promise, yet this optimism quickly waned as Jeeps frequently began landing in treacherous rivers, entangled in dense tree canopies, or, even worse, directly into enemy-held territory, leaving no practical means for retrieval. Gliders, despite their own issues, at least possessed the undeniable advantage of delivering the vehicle precisely to the location where ground troops urgently required it. As the calendar turned to early 1943, the ongoing deadlock surrounding Jeep delivery had escalated into a full-blown crisis. Operation Husky, the pivotal invasion of Sicily, loomed large on the horizon, scheduled for a critical July deployment. Airborne divisions were slated to spearhead this formidable assault, and their commanders desperately required robust vehicle support to ensure operational success. These military leaders were confronted with the grim prospect of dispatching their highly trained paratroopers into intense combat scenarios encumbered by the very same critical mobility disadvantage that had proven so devastatingly costly to German forces during the Battle of Crete. The Quartermaster Corps, having exhausted every conceivable conventional solution, found itself utterly devoid of further ideas. It was at this critical juncture that a forgotten name resurfaced, that of a civilian engineer hailing from Vermont, who had once proposed what was then considered an extraordinarily wasteful and unconventional crate design. Palmer Putnam's revolutionary container was anything but a crate in the traditional understanding of the term. Instead, it was an intricate destruction machine, meticulously conceived and engineered to systematically dismantle itself in a precisely orchestrated sequence. When military engineers, acting under considerable duress and reluctant persuasion from high-ranking airborne commanders, finally afforded his blueprints a thorough examination in February 1943, they discovered a design that flagrantly contravened every established principle of cargo packaging they had meticulously acquired over their careers. Conventional military containers were invariably constructed with the objective of safeguarding their contents through sheer structural integrity, employing rigid walls specifically designed to robustly resist any form of deformation. Putnam's ingenious design, however, pursued the exact antithesis of this approach. It was purposefully fabricated to yield, to crumple, and to dissipate the kinetic energy of an impact by disintegrating in a highly controlled and progressive fashion. This groundbreaking concept, remarkably, drew inspiration from a fundamental engineering principle that would not be widely adopted as mainstream automotive safety doctrine for another full 2 decades: the strategic implementation of crumple zones. The fundamental architecture of Putnam's innovative crate comprised plywood panels, each precisely 3/4 of an inch thick, meticulously arranged in a robust honeycomb pattern that enveloped the Jeep. Crucially, these were not merely solid, unyielding walls. Putnam had ingeniously integrated deliberate weak points into their construction, specifically, scored sections designed to buckle and collapse precisely when subjected to predetermined load thresholds. One might visualize this ingenious arrangement as a wooden accordion, expertly crafted to compress in distinct, sequential stages. The outermost panels were engineered to yield first, effectively absorbing the initial, raw shock of impact. As these primary panels collapsed inward, their deformation initiated the cascade failure of successive, secondary panels, which in turn absorbed the subsequent wave of destructive energy. Consequently, by the time the formidable impact forces eventually reached the Jeep itself, their intensity had been profoundly mitigated, progressively dissipated through an intricate series of multiple layers of controlled, sequential destruction. The crate, in essence, sacrificed itself to preserve its precious cargo. Further enhancing this intricate design, robust steel cables were threaded throughout the structure, forming a complex web pattern that ingeniously connected the floor to the roof panels. These cables were calibrated with a highly specific tension rating. Under conditions of normal handling and transport, they remained sufficiently slack to permit a degree of slight structural flex. However, upon experiencing the violent forces of a crash, these cables would instantly become taut, functioning as crucial energy limiters that precisely controlled the rate at which the crate collapsed, preventing it from disintegrating too rapidly. Putnam understood that if the structure were to fail with excessive speed, the entirety of the impact energy would be transferred to the Jeep instantaneously, a scenario no different, and equally destructive, to a conventional, unprotected crash. Conversely, if the collapse occurred too slowly, the crate would not compress adequately before the glider potentially collided with secondary obstacles. Through meticulous calculations, Putnam had determined the precise cable gauge and the exact tension required to optimally distribute the deceleration forces over an approximate duration of 0.2 of a second. This minuscule fraction of time, barely perceptible, proved to be the pivotal factor distinguishing between a hopelessly bent axle and a fully functional, operational vehicle. The floor assembly of Putnam's ingenious design exhibited an equally sophisticated level of engineering. Rather than being affixed directly and rigidly to the glider deck, the entire crated unit rested upon an innovative system of wooden skids, which were interconnected by specially designed shear pins. These meticulously engineered pins were calibrated to snap precisely when subjected to predetermined levels of force, thereby permitting the entire package, crate and Jeep combined, to slide forward several feet during the moment of impact, even as the glider structure around it came to an abrupt halt. This controlled, forward-sliding motion served to further prolong and extend the crucial deceleration time. To grasp this concept, one might draw a parallel to the arresting cable system employed on an aircraft carrier, However, in this application, instead of gradually bringing a high-speed aircraft to a halt, Putnam had devised a method for progressively decelerating a jeep, even as its immediate surroundings experienced an instantaneous cessation of motion. Within the protective confines of the crate, the jeep itself was not secured in the customary, rigid manner typically associated with cargo. Instead, Putnam had implemented its own distinct suspension system, strategically placed rubber blocks positioned at critical points along the vehicle's frame, meticulously held in place by wooden brackets engineered to shear away and break under conditions of extreme load. The jeep, therefore, effectively floated within its container, comprehensively cushioned from all directions. During the violent event of a crash, as the outer crate progressively collapsed inward, these rubber blocks simultaneously compressed, introducing yet another crucial layer of energy absorption into the system. The true genius of the design resided in its precise sequencing. A meticulously choreographed cascade of events unfolded. Outer panels failed, steel cables stretched taut, floor skids slid forward, inner wooden brackets broke away, and finally, the rubber blocks compressed, all combining in a rapid, interconnected chain reaction that transmuted a single, colossal impact force into a succession of smaller, distinctly survivable impacts. The engineers within the Quartermaster Corps, upon their comprehensive review of this audacious design, readily acknowledged its theoretical elegance and undeniable ingenuity. However, they were equally quick to grasp the profound practical nightmare it presented. The construction of each individual crate demanded an astonishing 220 board feet of aircraft-grade plywood, a material so stringently rationed during wartime that numerous civilian furniture manufacturers had been compelled to cease operations entirely to conserve the precious supply. The incorporation of the specialized steel cable further contributed an additional 40 pounds to the weight of each crate. The demand for the critical rubber blocks placed direct competitive pressure on the already strained tire production efforts. Furthermore, the meticulous assembly process necessitated the employment of highly skilled carpenters, working with exacting precision from incredibly detailed specifications, leaving absolutely no margin for error in either panel thickness or the critical cable tension. Yet, it was a particular aspect of the design that truly exasperated and deeply rankled the military logistics officers: the crate's inherently single-use nature. Following a solitary landing, it was irrevocably reduced to mere scrap wood. There was no possibility of salvaging its components or reusing the structure. Thus, every single jeep successfully delivered necessitated the destruction of another meticulously constructed crate. When Palmer Putnam unveiled his comprehensive cost analysis, the figures were unequivocally damning. Each individual crate was projected to cost approximately $180 to fabricate, a significant sum when compared to the $738 price tag of the Jeep it contained. This meant that a staggering 24% was being added to the vehicle's overall cost purely for its disposable packaging. Extrapolating this expenditure across the 10,000 Jeeps the Army ambitiously intended to deliver by glider over the forthcoming year, the financial implication was immense. An estimated $1.8 million allocated solely for packaging, a sum roughly equivalent to $31 million in today's currency, all for wooden boxes destined to be discarded and abandoned across the battlefields of French fields. The Quartermaster General, in a moment of exasperated candor, famously dubbed it the most exorbitantly priced kindling ever produced in military annals. Nevertheless, the airborne commanders, confronting grim casualty projections for critical operations that would proceed devoid of essential vehicle support, articulated their position with unyielding clarity. Either the necessary funds for these crates would be allocated, or the entirety of the planned airborne missions would have to be regrettably canceled. the weighty decision was consequently elevated to the highest echelons of the War Department. In March 1943, defying every ingrained bureaucratic instinct that vehemently argued against such an extravagant expenditure, the department, recognizing the strategic imperative, reluctantly granted authorization for comprehensive field testing of Putnam's unconventional design. The critical testing program commenced at Wright Field, Ohio, in April 1943, initiating not with the direct deployment of gliders, but rather with a series of rudimentary drop tests conducted from robust wooden towers. Engineers, understandably cautious, were unwilling to jeopardize costly gliders and the lives of highly trained pilots on a concept that remained entirely unproven. Consequently, they constructed a substantial 15-foot platform, onto which a crated jeep was carefully loaded via a specialized release mechanism, allowing the immutable force of gravity to execute the test. The inaugural drop utilized a meticulously assembled prototype crate, with Palmer Putnam himself personally overseeing every aspect of its construction. He had journeyed from Vermont at his own considerable expense, fueled by an unwavering resolve to unequivocally vindicate his design and silence the numerous skeptics. With bated breath, observers watched as the jeep made contact with the ground. As anticipated, the crate spectacularly disintegrated into a shower of splinters, performing precisely as its ingenious design intended. Crucially, once the scattered debris was meticulously cleared away, the vehicle, to the astonishment of many, roared to life on the very first turn of the crank. Engineers meticulously examined the jeep's frame using precision levels and an array of measuring tools, confirming zero distortion and finding its suspension system entirely intact. One officer, present at this seminal event, later documented in his official report an expectation of utter disaster, yet instead bore witness to a phenomenon that seemed to defy the very tenets of common sense. Emboldened by this initial triumph, the testing team progressively elevated the drop height, first to 20 feet, and then to an even more challenging 25 feet. For each subsequent test, new crates and fresh jeeps were employed, and with remarkable consistency, the positive results were replicated, solidifying confidence in Putnam's radical approach. Despite the unequivocal success of the tower drops, the astute observers from the Quartermaster Corps remained unconvinced that these tests fully replicated the multifaceted dynamics of actual combat conditions. They astutely pointed out that genuine glider impacts encompass not merely vertical force, but also significant horizontal velocity, often involving complex sliding, tumbling motions, and the application of highly asymmetric loads. The controlled environment of the tower tests, while probing the crate's efficacy against straight-down impacts, did not account for the chaotic unpredictability of a battlefield landing. Combat scenarios, they rightly asserted, would rarely involve a perfectly vertical descent. Consequently, in May, the testing protocol advanced to its next, far more perilous phase, a series of actual glider crashes. This escalation marked a turning point where the testing regimen became both considerably more expensive and inherently dangerous. The subsequent test protocol was nothing short of brutal in its design and execution. A crated jeep would be meticulously loaded into a CG-4A glider, which was then towed to an altitude of 800 feet before being released over a specifically designated landing zone. The instruction to the pilots was unequivocal: bring the glider down with extreme force, deliberately hard. These were not the gentle, controlled approaches that experienced pilots would typically attempt under pristine, ideal conditions. Rather, these were meticulously orchestrated worst-case scenarios, engineered to push the limits of the crate's protective capabilities. Pilots were explicitly directed to simulate the most challenging and unforgiving combat landings, employing steep approaches, executing high-speed touchdowns, and navigating deliberately rough terrain. To ensure comprehensive evaluation, Wright Field had painstakingly prepared several distinct landing zones, each presenting varying and arduous conditions. A section of freshly plowed earth, an area of densely packed clay, and a zone intentionally strewn with logs to realistically replicate the formidable obstacles posed by hedgerows in a European battlefield. The rigorous testing environment was meticulously prepared, employing logs strategically placed to mimic the dense, natural hedgerows often encountered in potential combat zones. Over a concentrated period of 6 weeks, the dedicated teams executed a series of 23 demanding glider crash tests, each involving a Jeep securely encased within its specialized protective crate. The initial 5 trials proceeded without a hitch, demonstrating remarkable success. In these instances, the gliders met their intended fate, disintegrating upon impact as designed, while the robust crates fractured into pieces, liberating the Jeeps which, astonishingly, were then driven away under their own power. However, the 6th test presented unforeseen challenges and complexities. The pilot, miscalculating his trajectory, approached the landing zone with excessive speed, causing the glider to violently cartwheel upon its initial contact with the ground. This chaotic maneuver sent the crate and its precious cargo, the Jeep, into a dramatic double tumble, end over end. Onlookers and engineers, witnessing the violent spectacle, anticipated nothing short of complete ruin for the vehicle. Yet, as the turbulent cloud of dust gradually subsided, they discovered the Jeep resting on its side, remarkably still firmly secured within the fragmented remnants of its protective casing. Promptly, the crew righted the vehicle, meticulously inspecting it for any significant harm. Their findings were astonishingly minimal, merely a slightly bent front bumper and a single cracked headlight lens. Crucially, the engine roared to life with a turn of the key, and the Jeep was driven away. This incident powerfully underscored that even an extreme, uncontrolled glider tumble had failed to surpass the extraordinary protective capabilities engineered into the crate. The most compelling and dramatic confirmation of the crate's efficacy arrived with test number 12. During its descent, the glider encountered a fierce crosswind that abruptly caught its right wing, causing it to dip sharply and violently slam into the ground first. The impact initiated a catastrophic sequence. The fuselage spun a full 180 degrees, fractured decisively amidships, and the entire tail section completely detached. The forward portion, which contained the vital Jeep, continued its destructive trajectory, plowing an additional 50 feet through the terrain, shedding its fabric skin and splintering wooden ribs as it went. The scene was one of utter devastation, resembling the aftermath of an explosion, with wreckage and debris scattered across a staggering 100-yard radius. Recovery teams faced a daunting task, requiring a full 20 minutes simply to locate the crated Jeep amidst the extensive wreckage. To their astonishment, they discovered the vehicle almost perfectly preserved, nestled within the completely demolished fragments of its protective crate, albeit covered in shattered timber and ripped fabric. A mere 15 minutes later, the Jeep's engine was successfully started and running. The test pilot, who had miraculously emerged from the catastrophic crash with only minor bruises, stood beside the operational Jeep, his face a mixture of relief and disbelieving laughter. However, not every test proceeded without incident or revealed perfection. Test 17, for example, brought to light a critical design flaw within the floor skid system. During its landing, the glider unexpectedly struck a significant depression in the field. Instead of smoothly gliding over the uneven terrain, the skids became jammed, bringing the glider to an abrupt and jarring halt which consequently bent the Jeep's rear axle. Palmer Putnam, demonstrating his characteristic ingenuity and dedication, immediately embarked on a 3-day intensive redesign effort. He meticulously re-engineered the skid attachment points, incorporating crucial beveled edges specifically intended to prevent any future jamming, even when encountering the most uneven ground. This refined and modified design was subsequently integrated into Test 20, where the previous problem was entirely eradicated. By the close of June, the comprehensive test program had achieved an impressive 87% survival rate, a statistic meaning that an overwhelming 87% of the crated jeeps successfully emerged from their crash landings in a fully drivable condition. This represented a monumental improvement compared to the prior dismal 30% rate observed with standard, less specialized packaging. The undeniable and compelling results left the Quartermaster Corps with no choice but to acknowledge the effectiveness of Putnam's innovation. While the design itself garnered acceptance, this acknowledgement did not, however, extend to the individual credit for Palmer Putnam. In the official reports submitted to the War Department, the groundbreaking innovation was conspicuously attributed to the collective efforts of Quartermaster Corps engineers, working in collaboration with civilian consultants. Putnam's name, if it appeared at all, was relegated to the anonymity of footnotes, never gracing the prominent headlines. The deeply entrenched issue of institutional pride, unfortunately, had not dissipated. Despite the overwhelming evidence, senior military officers, while fully comprehending that this ingenious design held the potential to dramatically save countless lives and decisively contribute to winning crucial battles, were nevertheless unwilling to bestow proper recognition upon an outsider who had so clearly demonstrated the shortcomings of their own engineering teams. Consequently, lucrative production contracts were swiftly dispatched to major lumber mills situated in Oregon and Michigan, initiating a rapid industrial mobilization. By the summer month of July in 1943, manufacturing facilities across the nation were actively producing these specialized crates at an impressive and increasing pace, reaching a volume of 200 units per week. Comprehensive training manuals were meticulously developed and distributed, instructing assembly crews on the exact and precise specifications required for each crate. Meanwhile, the unacknowledged innovator, Palmer Putnam, quietly returned to his home in Vermont. His monumental contribution was officially classified, his pivotal role systematically minimized, and his truly revolutionary design now stood poised to confront its ultimate and most formidable challenge, the unforgiving crucible of actual combat. Operation Overlord, the monumental Allied invasion of Normandy, continues to hold its place in the annals of military history as the most extensive amphibious assault ever conceived and executed. However, the initial securing of the beaches represented merely the nascent stage of a far grander and more perilous undertaking. Allied strategic planners possessed a keen awareness that formidable German armored divisions would swiftly mobilize to encircle and contain the nascent beachhead. Should these powerful enemy forces succeed in trapping the invasion troops within a confined coastal strip, the entirety of the meticulously planned operation risked collapsing into an unimaginable bloodbath. Therefore, achieving rapid and decisive movement inland was deemed absolutely indispensable. Within mere hours of their initial landing, Allied troops were mandated to push beyond the immediate beach zones, swiftly seizing critical crossroads, effectively severing German reinforcement routes, and establishing robust defensive perimeters deep within hostile, occupied territory. Elite paratrooper units were designated to spearhead this crucial inland thrust, executing daring jumps behind enemy lines in the pre-dawn hours. Yet, a stark and undeniable lesson had been painfully learned from preceding airborne operations in Sicily, Salerno, and Italy. paratroopers operating without the essential support of vehicles were inherently vulnerable, effectively becoming static and immobile targets. For the impending D-Day operations, the distinguished 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions submitted an urgent requisition for an astonishing 1,400 jeeps, a quantity entirely without precedent for airborne delivery. Each of these versatile vehicles was earmarked to fulfill a critical tactical function, whether transporting a vital machine gun crew, maneuvering a mortar team into position, or serving as an indispensable ammunition resupply unit. Furthermore, these divisions also placed requests for essential heavy equipment, including 75mm pack howitzers, formidable anti-tank guns, and crucial medical supplies, all of which were utterly dependent on the availability of vehicles for their effective movement and deployment. The dire consequence of not possessing these jeeps was stark. Paratroopers would be compelled to consolidate defensively around their designated drop zones, forced to await the arrival of ground forces, a delay that could potentially span several arduous days. Conversely, armed with these indispensable jeeps, the airborne troops would gain the crucial mobility to swiftly strike at entrenched German positions, establish strategic roadblocks many miles inland, and effectively sow widespread chaos and disruption deep within the German rear areas. Thus, the entire ambitious operational concept for the airborne assault pivoted precariously on a single, critical unknown: whether Palmer Putnam's meticulously engineered crates would reliably perform their protective function under the brutal realities of actual combat conditions, on an unprecedented scale, and directly beneath the relentless onslaught of enemy fire. On the eve of the invasion, June 5th, loading operations commenced with a feverish intensity across numerous airfields scattered throughout southern England. Every single crate had been meticulously pre-assembled at designated forward staging areas, with the jeeps carefully driven inside and secured precisely according to Palmer Putnam's stringent specifications. Dedicated ground crews then employed a combination of powerful winches and specialized loading ramps to skillfully maneuver the weighty, crated jeeps into the waiting CG-4A gliders. This intricate process, demanding utmost care and coordination, consumed approximately 45 minutes for each individual glider. With literally hundreds of gliders being loaded concurrently, the vast operation took on the appearance of an immense, highly synchronized factory floor, where crews moved with an almost balletic, rehearsed precision. Their tasks were manifold and critical, scrupulously checking cable tensions, assiduously verifying the secure installation of shear pins, and diligently confirming that the essential rubber mounting blocks had not suffered any degradation during their period in storage. The gravity of their work was keenly felt. A single, solitary error in any stage of this complex assembly could tragically result in a destroyed jeep and, consequently, leave vital airborne troops stranded and vulnerable behind enemy lines. The vanguard of gliders severed their tow lines high above the embattled skies of Normandy at precisely 0330 hours on June 6, a critical 3 hours preceding the monumental beach landings. They descended in successive waves, with formations of 20 to 30 aircraft at a time, having been released from their powerful tow planes at altitudes ranging between 600 and 1,000 feet. However, what the meticulously controlled training exercises at Wright Field could never adequately replicate was the sheer, unadulterated chaos of actual combat landings. Intense anti-aircraft fire tore relentlessly through the glider formations, its deadly projectiles ripping gaping holes in their fragile fabric wings. Tracers, like fiery streaks, vividly illuminated the oppressive pre-dawn darkness, painting a terrifying picture of the aerial battle. Confronted with this onslaught, some pilots were compelled to execute desperate evasive maneuvers, violently throwing their gliders into steep dives and sharp turns. These extreme actions subjected their precious cargo to G-forces and stresses far exceeding the original design specifications. Others discovered their designated landing zones completely obscured by billowing smoke from earlier bombardments, or already pockmarked with craters from relentless naval shelling. With no other viable option, they were forced to set down wherever an opportunity arose, in fields deliberately flooded by German defensive measures, in pastures ominously crisscrossed with sharp, anti-glider poles ominously nicknamed Rommel's asparagus, or even in the intimate gardens tucked behind ancient Norman farmhouses. A particularly harrowing incident involved Glider 17, belonging to the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, which tragically slammed into a formidable stone wall at unmitigated full speed. The impact was cataclysmic. The glider's nose instantly crumpled inward, the cockpit utterly collapsed, and both pilots aboard were killed instantaneously. The fuselage violently accordioned backward upon itself, and the entire tail section was completely ripped away. When Allied troops reached the mangled wreck approximately 20 minutes later, their grim expectation was to discover nothing more than a twisted heap of scrap metal as they prepared to recover the Jeep. True to its design, the protective crate had indeed disintegrated, its wooden panels having shattered and scattered across a 50-foot expanse of the field. Yet, amidst this scene of utter devastation, the Jeep itself sat remarkably intact within the debris field, its wheels mired in mud, but fundamentally and structurally sound. With an immediate sense of urgency and relief, they managed to start its engine, carefully backed it out of the wreckage, swiftly mounted a .30 caliber machine gun onto its frame, and astonishingly, had the vehicle fully operational and actively engaged in combat within the hour. Another compelling incident involved Glider 31, originating from the esteemed 101st Airborne Division, which was compelled to execute a landing in a treacherously flooded zone situated near the strategic village of St. Miraglise. The pilot, facing an impossible choice, had no alternative, as all other potential landing sites presented even graver dangers. The glider skittered precariously across the expanse of standing water, much like a stone skipping over a pond, before violently colliding with a submerged fence post and ultimately nosing deep into the thick mud. Predictably, water inundated the entire cargo bay. Recovery crews, undeterred, waded through waist-deep water, their expectations firmly set on discovering a completely drowned and inoperable engine. Although Palmer Putnam's innovative crate design had not specifically been engineered to accommodate water landings, a fortuitous design feature, the elevated floor skids, had inadvertently kept the Jeep sufficiently high within the cargo bay, thus ensuring that its crucial engine intake remained remarkably dry. They successfully towed the vehicle to drier ground using another Jeep, meticulously drained its carburetor, and to their immense relief, the engine roared to life and ran perfectly. It is important to acknowledge, however, that not every single delivery met with success. Indeed, some gliders tragically crashed with such catastrophic force, and in such extreme circumstances, that even the brilliant engineering of Palmer Putnam's protective crate could not preserve their precious cargo. These included gliders that violently struck towering trees, disintegrating in midair before ever reaching the ground, those that inadvertently landed in treacherous German minefields, detonating ordnance against which no crate could possibly offer protection, and gliders that burst into flames after being struck by devastating incendiary rounds during their perilous approach. Nevertheless, these truly catastrophic failures constituted a remarkably small fraction, representing less than 15% of the total deliveries. The overwhelming majority, a staggering 85%, successfully deployed functional vehicles directly into the hands of the airborne troops within mere hours of their landings. By the early morning of 0900 hours on June 6, an impressive contingent of over 2,100 jeeps was actively operational behind German lines. These invaluable vehicles were swiftly employed to tow formidable anti-tank guns into strategic positions, ready to ambush unsuspecting German armor. They diligently carried the wounded to vital aid stations and reliably supplied critical ammunition to isolated units. In essence, these jeeps transformed scattered and vulnerable paratroopers into a formidable, cohesive, and highly mobile striking force, fundamentally altering the dynamics of the battlefield. In their subsequent after-action reports, German commanders meticulously documented their profound confusion and disarray. They had anticipated encountering lightly armed infantry, units that could be readily contained and ultimately destroyed with conventional tactics. Instead, they were confronted by highly mechanized units, possessing unexpected firepower and remarkable mobility, forces that seemed to appear impossibly deep behind their lines, with an astonishing, unprecedented speed. The established German protocol for responding to airborne landings, which typically involved dispatching armored divisions to swiftly crush the drop zones, was utterly disrupted. Their tanks and personnel carriers instead encountered fierce, jeep-mounted ambushes many miles from their anticipated positions. The audacious operational tempo that Allied planners had meticulously gambled upon, a strategy that rested entirely on the successful delivery of airborne vehicles, had indeed materialized with devastating effectiveness. And the unheralded innovator, Palmer Putnam, quietly residing back in Vermont, would remain oblivious to the monumental success of his design until he eventually read about its triumphant performance in the newspapers, many weeks after the fact. The devastating global conflict finally concluded in Europe in May of 1945, followed by its cessation in the Pacific theater that August. As the vast military apparatus began its demobilization, millions upon millions of pages of classified documents, many bearing the indelible stamps of restricted or confidential, were systematically transferred into extensive archival storage. Amongst this colossal collection of historical records were the comprehensive Wright Field Test reports, the critical D-Day after-action assessments, and various pieces of correspondence explicitly detailing Palmer Putnam's invaluable and pioneering contributions to the field of airborne logistics. Yet, when the official history of the airborne operations was eventually published by the War Department in 1947, it dedicated a mere 3 pages to the subject of glider-delivered vehicles. This narrative acknowledged innovative packaging solutions developed by Quartermaster Corps engineers, and provided a concise technical description of the shock-absorbing crates. Conspicuously, and with a profound sense of historical injustice, Palmer Putnam's name appeared nowhere within the entirety of that official document. For the official record and institutional recognition, the groundbreaking innovation was exclusively attributed to the military. This practice was hardly unprecedented within the annals of post-war military historiography, where the armed forces habitually minimized civilian contributions to meticulously cultivate an image of complete self-sufficiency. In this prevalent narrative, combat engineers were credited with constructing vital bridges, military scientists with pioneering radar technology, and army cryptographers with deciphering enemy codes. Such was the account presented to the public, and in numerous instances, it accurately reflected reality. However, the systematic obliteration of Palmer Putnam's pivotal role transcended the typical bureaucratic inclination to hoard credit. It was deeply rooted in a profound sense of institutional embarrassment. The Quartermaster Corps had initially scorned his design, branding it as extravagant and dismissing him as an impractical civilian. Only when confronted with dire necessity were they compelled to subject it to testing, whereupon it performed with brilliant efficacy. The institutional reaction was not one of gratitude, but rather quiet resentment, swiftly followed by a concerted campaign to reframe the historical account. Putnam himself displayed no inclination to contend for recognition. Following the cessation of hostilities, he quietly redirected his prodigious talents back to his wind energy endeavors, concurrently contributing to hydroelectric systems and authoring scholarly papers on renewable energy that were presciently decades ahead of their time. In the 1950s, he penned a definitive volume on wind power generation, a text that would become a foundational pillar in the emerging field. When acquaintances inquired about his wartime involvement, he would allude to consulting for the military, yet he offered no specifics. Whether he had been bound by non-disclosure agreements or simply exercised a personal preference for discretion remains unclear from the extant records. Nevertheless, the individual who had brilliantly resolved one of the war's most critical logistical conundrums gradually receded into obscurity, even as his ingenious solution transitioned into standard operational procedure. The ingenious crate design, however, did not vanish. Military logistics planners, discerning its intrinsic value, readily integrated it into their operations, albeit without ever acknowledging its true originator. Throughout the late 1940s, and extending into the Korean War, myriad iterations of Putnam's pioneering shock-absorbing container began to appear prominently within official supply manuals. The distinctive honeycomb panel structure, the sophisticated principle of progressive collapse, and the innovative cable-limited energy dissipation mechanism all swiftly became quintessential features in the realm of airborne cargo packaging. By the 1960s, the design had undergone substantial evolution, shedding its original form almost beyond recognition, as modern materials supplanted the initial plywood and steel cable. Engineers incorporated advanced crushable aluminum sections, high-performance foam energy absorbers, and pneumatic cushions, yet the fundamental conceptual bedrock endured, safeguarding precious cargo by orchestrating the controlled, sequential destruction of its protective container. Then arrived the transformative era ushered in by the Freedom of Information Act and the subsequent waves of declassification that swept through the 1970s. Researchers, diligently sifting through newly released World War II documents housed at the National Archives, fortuitously stumbled upon the crucial Wright Field Test reports. Within the often overlooked footnotes and appendices, the name Palmer Putnam tentatively began to surface. A diligent graduate student, immersed in crafting a dissertation on wartime logistics innovations, meticulously tracked down the original rejection letters from the Quartermaster Corps, uncovered Putnam's initial detailed proposals, and painstakingly reconstructed the intricate timeline of events. Finally, in 1978, a modest academic article materialized in a specialized military history journal, a full 35 years after the fact, definitively establishing the long-obscured link between Putnam and the revolutionary airborne Jeep delivery system. Tragically, Putnam himself had passed away 2 years prior, never knowing that historians had at last unearthed his buried, monumental contribution. This belated exposure triggered a modest, albeit significant, reassessment within specialized military engineering circles. Articles published in various Army logistics publications candidly acknowledged that the prevailing narrative had been incomplete, conceding that civilian innovation had, in fact, played a far more substantial role than previously recognized or stated. Yet, this corrective information reached only a highly circumscribed audience, primarily specialists, dedicated historians, and engineers meticulously studying legacy systems. The broader public, regrettably, never became privy to this remarkable story. World War II documentaries, focused predominantly on epic battles and celebrated generals, found no narrative space for a modest wind energy consultant from Vermont who had designed innovative wooden boxes. The overarching heroism narrative simply lacked room for such an unassuming figure. What did, however, survive and proliferate with undeniable vigor was the technology itself. Contemporary airdrop containers employed by the U.S. military directly traced their sophisticated lineage back to Palmer Putnam's foundational principles. The container delivery system, first introduced in the 1980s, masterfully utilizes layered energy absorption techniques to meticulously protect cargo during precision low-altitude parachute drops. Similarly, the Army's low-velocity airdrop system, meticulously developed in the 1990s, ingeniously employs controlled structural collapse to gently cushion heavy equipment upon impact. Even diverse civilian applications have eagerly adopted and adapted this core concept. Automotive crumple zones designed for passenger safety, intricate packaging solutions for delicate electronics, and rigorously crash-tested shipping containers all owe a conceptual debt to Putnam. The profound idea that Palmer Putnam had championed against considerable institutional resistance, the counterintuitive notion that superior protection emanates from strategic destruction rather than rigid, unyielding strength, became a foundational tenet across a multitude of industries. In 2003, a discrete historical marker was finally erected at a Vermont wind farm where Putnam had conducted his pioneering turbine experiments in the 1930s. The plaque duly noted his groundbreaking renewable energy work and included a solitary sentence regarding his World War II contributions. Developed innovative cargo packaging systems for military airborne operations. No specific details were provided, no explanation of the profound significance of this achievement, merely a fleeting footnote, which, with poignant irony, precisely mirrored the institutional memory's reduction of his monumental legacy. The thousands of courageous soldiers who safely drove jeeps out of glider wrecks never comprehended, who had made their survival possible. The legions of engineers, who have meticulously built upon his principles for over 8 decades, rarely know the genesis of their own foundational technology. And therein lies the ultimate irony. The most unequivocally successful military innovations are often those that seamlessly recede into the background, becoming so intrinsically standard and ubiquitous that their origins are never questioned. Fast forward to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, in 2010. A colossal C-17 Globemaster majestically lifts off into the deepening dusk. Its cavernous cargo bay is meticulously loaded with what the Air Force formally designates as a Type 5 airdrop platform, a sturdy wooden pallet cradling a Humvee, meticulously encased in protective packaging. The aircraft ascends to an altitude of 200 feet, precisely levels off, and the skilled loadmaster initiates the release sequence. Parachutes deploy with a precise snap, the platform smoothly exits the cargo bay, and a mere 30 seconds later, it impacts a designated desert landing zone at a speed of 24 feet per second. The platform strikes the earth. The sophisticated packaging crushes in carefully engineered stages, and the vital vehicle contained within absorbs forces that would otherwise contort an unprotected frame into worthless scrap. Soldiers reach the drop zone approximately 15 minutes later, swiftly cut away the now destroyed packaging, and drive the Humvee directly to a forward operating base. Mission accomplished. Palmer Putnam had passed away 34 years before this specific airdrop transpired, yet his indelible engineering DNA is intricately woven into every single layer of that advanced protective system. The modern container delivery system represents a sophisticated evolution of Putnam's original wooden crates, refined over 7 decades of relentless material science advancements. Instead of rudimentary plywood panels, contemporary systems now employ advanced aerospace honeycomb aluminum, meticulously engineered to collapse at precisely predetermined crush loads. In place of conventional steel cables, they utilize high-strength aramid fiber webbing, designed with precisely calculated tensile limits. Rather than simple rubber blocks, they integrate closed-cell foam, rigorously rated for specific energy absorption per cubic inch. Yet, if one strips away these modern materials, the fundamental architectural brilliance remains identical. Outer layers are designed to fail first. Progressive energy dissipation is achieved through controlled destruction. Sophisticated suspension systems meticulously decouple the cargo from direct impact forces, and floor assemblies are ingeniously designed to slide and absorb energy rather than rigidly transfer shock. The Joint Precision Airdrop System, JPADS, a revolutionary innovation introduced in 2004, augmented cargo parachutes with advanced GPS guidance, enabling pinpoint delivery of critical supplies to troops situated in locations inaccessible by ground convoy. This sophisticated system is capable of deploying 5 tons of supplies with astonishing accuracy, placing them within 150 feet of a designated target from an altitude of 25,000 feet. However, such precision would be rendered utterly meaningless if the cargo arrived damaged or destroyed. Every single JPADS container unequivocally employs a direct descendant of Putnam's original collapse-in-sequence design. During extensive operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the system successfully delivered over 5 million pounds of diverse cargo with an exceptional 98% serviceability rate, signifying that an overwhelming 98% of dropped items arrived fully intact and immediately usable. This remarkable statistic serves as the clearest and most compelling validation of Putnam's profound core insight, that if the destruction is engineered with meticulous precision, nothing truly critical will ever be destroyed. Civilian applications have embraced and further extrapolated this ingenious principle. Modern automotive design mandates the incorporation of sophisticated crumple zones that are specifically engineered to absorb collision energy, while simultaneously preserving the rigid integrity of the passenger compartment, a design philosophy precisely mirroring Putnam's approach to safeguarding Jeeps within collapsing crates. The ubiquitous iPhone residing in your pocket is encased within packaging designed with remarkably similar staged collapse structures, strategically placed foam inserts that compress in a precise sequence to meticulously protect the delicate glass and intricate electronics during the inevitable impacts of shipping. Even Amazon's much-lauded frustration-free packaging initiative leverages the very same energy dissipation mathematics. The sheer ubiquity of this concept has paradoxically rendered it largely invisible. People rarely contemplate why fragile items survive shipping, nor do they question the sophisticated engineering that underpins this seamless functionality. Disaster relief operations compellingly showcase the technology's contemporary reach and vital importance. When catastrophic earthquakes or devastating hurricanes sever ground access, airdrop supplies frequently become the sole viable option for delivering aid. The United Nations and various military organizations globally maintain extensive stockpiles of airdrop-ready containers, meticulously designed to withstand the rigors of rough landings in unprepared and often challenging terrain. Essential medical equipment, advanced water purification systems, and vital emergency shelters are all carefully packaged in direct descendants of Putnam's pioneering World War II crates. Following the catastrophic 2010 Haiti earthquake, U.S. Air Force C-17s conducted over 200 critical airdrops into Port-au-Prince, employing these GPS-guided containers. The sophisticated packaging that diligently protected those life-saving supplies, enabling clean water and vital antibiotics to reach desperate survivors, meticulously followed design principles first drafted on a Vermont engineer's drawing board in 1942. The ultimate irony, however, lies in the fact that Putnam himself never sought to extend the application of his revolutionary innovation beyond its immediate wartime necessity. Palmer C. Putnam possessed an extraordinary knack for identifying complex issues, devising ingenious solutions, and then promptly shifting his intellectual focus to the subsequent formidable undertaking. Following the cessation of hostilities, his extensive post-war endeavors gravitated towards the burgeoning field of wind energy. He meticulously theorized how advanced turbine technology might, in a distant future, successfully harness ambient air currents to generate substantial quantities of electricity from perpetually replenishing natural sources. This visionary work, much like his groundbreaking cargo crate innovation, significantly outpaced contemporary understanding and, regrettably, garnered scant attention throughout his lifespan. Presently, vast arrays of wind farms contribute in excess of 10% of the U.S.'s total electrical power, and Putnam's pioneering research documents are now routinely referenced within essential turbine engineering treatises. He truly embodied an individual whose insights consistently preceded prevailing thought by a remarkable 30 years, perpetually overlooked during his prime, yet ultimately proven correct long after any personal accolades would have held significance. Eventually, the armed forces did grant him a measure of recognition, albeit in a typically formal and understated bureaucratic manner. In the year 1991, within the hallowed halls of the Army Quartermaster Museum situated at Fort Lee, Virginia, a modest exhibition was unveiled, dedicated to pioneering advancements in airborne logistics. Among its various compelling displays, one particular showcase features an intricately crafted scale model of a CG-4A glider, offering a revealing cutaway perspective of a crated jeep nestled securely within its fuselage. The accompanying informational placard explicitly attributes the ingenious design's development to Palmer C. Putnam, identified precisely as a civilian engineer. This constitutes a rather subtle gesture, characteristic of an institutional footnote designed to rectify the official historical narrative without overtly publicizing the rectification itself. Those discerning visitors who pause to absorb the details on the plaque gain an insight that eludes the vast majority of the populace, that one of the Second World War's most pivotal logistics breakthroughs originated not from established military strategists or formidable defense contractors, but from the analytical mind of a wind energy consultant. This visionary possessed a profound comprehension that, on occasion, safeguarding something exceptionally valuable necessitates allowing its surrounding elements to fracture or yield in a meticulously engineered fashion. This very principle, initially scorned as extravagant and unworkable back in 1942, has since become so utterly indispensable to contemporary engineering methodologies that its once contentious origins have faded entirely from collective memory. And perhaps that is his ultimate, most profound legacy, not the fleeting accolades of fame, nor the direct attribution of credit, but rather an idea of such profound efficacy that it seamlessly integrates into the fabric of innovation, rendering its own origins imperceptible.